We're good to move.
We're clear.
We're clear. Let's move. We're clear.
Let me get my shoes.
Got you, sir. I got you, sir.
Let me get my shoes, sir.
Hold that in your head. It's bloody.
So we gotta move to the bus. Move to the bus. Let me get my shoes.
Okay, my shoes down. My shoes.
Watch out.
Wait.
Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that former President Donald Trump was millimeters away from being assassinated Saturday evening in a rally in Pennsylvania. For people who work in or care about climate tech, the stakes of the U.S. election are hard to overstate. Even in coverage today, Politico and Business Green particularly, about how Labor avoids the fate of the German coalition government or the Biden administration, both of which championed climate policies and both of which are struggling. This morning, we also learned that new Energy Secretary Ed Miliband will personally lead the COP29 delegation. The coverage of all of it now reflects the reality that the events of this past weekend might leave the UK as the place everyone will be watching to see if climate action and innovation can win against populists and authoritarians. Our friend Greg Walton of Agence France-Presse was there on the scene, and he made time to talk to us last night while driving to the neighborhood south of Pittsburgh where the 20-year-old would-be assassin grew up. Greg Walton, covering the United States for Agence France-Presse. Thanks for coming to Wicked Problems.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We've been friends for a good few years. We met each other in Qatar. You are now off on what would have been an interesting assignment no matter what, but you've just come from the scene of a shooting and an attempted assassination of a former president and current presidential candidate. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good. I was there. I was in the media riser, which they have at all of the Trump rallies. It's right in the middle, which gives you a great sense of the righteous anger of some crowd members and the pageant feel that these events have. You know, you're right in the thick of things with a perfect view of the stage. You know, I thought a couple of times that Trump might have caught my eye, maybe 100 feet away tops. Yeah, you know, you can see the man's facial expressions. You can keep up with the vibes. And yeah, it was in that position when former President Trump had reached about 5 minutes into his speech. He'd gone off teleprompter. He asked the crowd in the baking sun in Butler, Pennsylvania, if he could go off teleprompter, and they enthusiastically welcomed that. He was talking about immigration, showing a bar chart. I remember I was noting down that it didn't have a key. This chart, it had a source, but it didn't have a key, so it really meant nothing. But my observation meant nothing because 5-10 seconds later, there was, I think, 4 pops answered with 3 more. And as we now know, that was the attempted assassination.
Right. And I mean, again, it's such a trite question, but I've got to ask, Greg. I mean, like, you know, you're right there. I've heard the audio. I've heard your reactions. I mean, you are cool as cucumber in terms of also, you know, offering assistance to other people who seem in distress over the course of, you know, the minutes that follow. But like, what was it like being in the scrum, being right there, you know, in those moments where you heard the shots, you heard a noise? You know, what were your initial thoughts?
Just to focus, because I think the job of a foreign correspondent can be confused as being very complicated or very glamorous or even both. And it's really neither. In that moment, I just wanted to file. I wanted the desk editor who was moving my copy because we had 800 words that were about to move, telling a very different story, a story of children dressing up as former President Trump, of women wetting their baseball caps because of the heat. A light story, still touching on the politics and the populism, but very different story to the one we ended up telling, and didn't want that story to move after this incident. And then I wanted to flag to our chief editor what had happened, because wheels get set in motion very quickly at a wire, and people need to be moved, plans need to be made, bureaus need to be woken up. It all happens. and it happens in that second, and that's where we're competitive. And I was on Microsoft Teams. It's not glamorous, but I was trying to make sure I had a connection and could get the news out. And then I remembered that we didn't have a video crew there, and I'm video trained, and I opened up the camera on my app and I just filmed the DHS agents who were standing by me, filmed the crowd reactions, and then I got to the floor. So now I picked myself back up and got a position and filmed the stage because President Trump was still there. He was being lifted back up, and the sharpshooters were scanning the crowd, and it was all go. It was all happening in front of me with a perfect view. And so I tried to steady my arm and tried to stop shaking and, tried to capture the moment.
I mean, have you ever been in any situation like that before?
Yeah, I mean, nothing of that matter is good. I don't think anyone working and stuff has. I don't think we had anyone who would have been of the age to have covered the attempt on Reagan. But certainly when I've been in South Africa, I've shot at, or more accurately, a robber took a pot shot because he got lost after relieving my colleagues of their cameras. And it was exactly the same sound. It was like a pop. And so I did think straight away it's gunfire. Cautioned our teams, in Washington, that it could have been blanks because you just don't know. But being shot at in a township near Cape Town in Khayelitsha was similar because I was to get down, you get low, you make your body as small as possible and try and find some cover. And there wasn't a great selection of cover. In this case, I think I was beside some crates that had been used to bring sound equipment for the rally. And so I got down beside one of them and beneath the riser. So I had a really low profile. But it was nothing quite like that before.
Well, I mean, we're all, grateful. I mean, obviously it's tragic for the person in the crowd who did lose their life, and obviously tragic for the other people who were injured. But, we're grateful that you were not harmed. But I suppose you also then, your video, which you shared with me, which we will, if you're okay with this, share with our viewers and listeners, shows some extraordinary crowd reaction, which is after it's clear that former President Trump is, kind of more or less okay. He's done his thing. He's held up his fist. He's, told the crowd fight, and he's, then resisting being whisked off the stage by Secret Service. And then the crowd sort of turns. I mean, I'm still trying to make sense of this. Can you help me explain or understand what happened again, it's like only about 2 minutes after, Trump popped back up, after, he makes clear to the crowd he's relatively okay, and then the crowd turns. What happened?
I don't want to go too far down the road of comparing it to anything else because we've acknowledged it was a unique and hopefully one-off event. And I want to echo your condolences to the family of the victim and to everybody who was there.
Of course.
Former President Trump included, who clearly would have been traumatized and upset. They were exercising a democratic right, and it was despicable what happened. And I was affronted. He would have had to shoot over the media, my colleagues. I just haven't processed that bit yet. But in terms of the crowd response, it reminded me of, I've covered a lot of protests and a few protests that have turned violent. And it really just takes one in a febrile setting like that, in a moment like that, the whole crowd to turn. I've seen happy crowds turn angry, covering protests, demonstrations in Nigeria, in South Africa, where I've been posted previously. And that's what happened here. It was a inflection point, and I think that's it. The crowd wanted someone to blame. And at first, my belief is that members of the crowd were gesturing to the corner from where it appeared the shots had emanated. It's a fool's game to try and guess where gunshots have come from, unless you're a trained expert, but certainly sounded like it came from the back left of the fairground. And so initially, crowd members were gesturing and calling and hooting at that direction. And then I think, and this is a personal guess, I really am getting into guesswork here, which is another fool's game, you know.
Sure.
But I think it was then misunderstood by some crowd members that it was the media that this was targeted at, that it was the media who was being blamed. And in the conversations I've had since to rationalize this, some people have said, well, maybe people felt the media had set the gunman against former President Trump. I don't know about that. That's for scholars and the management in news to assess. But what I think is that was in that moment of confusion that the crowd wanted someone to blame. And I can understand that. Their lives are in danger too. And the man that they hold up as this country's future, his life was in danger. And they, in that moment, they scoped us for it. They scoped the media. Of whatever stripes, whatever nationality, whatever persuasion or medium, they blamed us. And it was a tense moment for sure.
I mean, did the tension dissipate relatively quickly, or I mean, again, I've heard the audio that went on for quite a few minutes after that, where there's a woman who's in distress at the end, who's clearly in shock and kind of processing what has just happened, and you're offering her water, you're trying to help her to kind of breathe, and I mean, was that kind of offer of help welcome? I mean, or as a member of the foreign press, was that something that that crowd was still, the hostility was still there?
I didn't receive any hostility. There was an address to the photographer that I was working with, a brilliant Pittsburgh-based photographer who was on the scene with me and helped me understand the local setup. There was a comment made to her along the lines of, "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" And I think we both decided to not dignify that comment. There would be no value in addressing this very distressed person's views. There's nothing we could have said to reassure them or change their mind. But I was interacting with the crowd quite early on in the day. I followed a play from a brilliant photographer, Marco Longari, who I covered many, many dicey situations with. And he told me the key to protest and public order situations where you think, this could go south, is to get there real early and meet the people. Go up to the big guys, go up to the big, strong guys and say hi and smile and be kind to the elderly folk in the crowd and talk to the children and talk to everybody and do what you can. There's not much you can do as a reporter, but we had pallets of bottled water and I was able to hand them out throughout the day.
Right.
So the crowd had, many, many people in the crowd had seen me talking, being open, asking open questions, not hiding in the pen, but moving around the fairgrounds. And I think that really helped dissipate any sense of frustration or aggression that I might have felt. I've never had at these events any aggression or hostility targeted at me. And clearly I've been fortunate because as colleagues have. We should be honest about this. There are members of Donald Trump's movement who would do ill to the media and say they will, and in cases they have. But I found this crowd to be, on an individual basis, peaceable and open to talking and expressing themselves and to hearing from me as well.
Well, I guess it's, I mean, again, if under there's other circumstances, like you say, you had 800 words that were going to move across the wire, about people turning up dressed as Donald Trump, or indeed the heat. And I suppose, again, we're a climate tech related podcast or show. And I suppose that would have been the story, right? Is that like this extreme heat, not necessarily extreme heat, but certainly, a lot of folks who were out there in the sun on a fairground, who there wasn't necessarily the best access to water. And that, could have potentially been the story, particularly as I understand, like several people sought medical attention through the course of the day as they were waiting for, the former president to come and speak. And, good that you were there to be able to hand out some water. But it's Oh, geez. I mean, it's just an extraordinary thing to have happened. And you've been there now back in, how long have you been now in the States covering this campaign, Greg?
It's been now about 8 months. So I arrived back end of November of last year.
Hmm. And you've seen some stuff. You were in the courtroom, were you not, for, the New York trial of Donald Trump?
I was, yeah, and it's been quite surreal seeing these two, maybe getting a little hackneyed now. I think I've used the phrase already, but these inflection points for Donald Trump. These are two of the most important moments of his life and of his political life. So I do think, to an extent, the events of yesterday will remove or fog from the public consciousness the conviction on 34 felony counts for covering up hush money payments. I just think that even journalistically takes a second row seat to what we saw yesterday. We should keep it in mind, and I'm sure many voters will, but the iconic image of former President Trump in front of the US flag hoisted above on a crane, him being lifted to his feet by his guardians, by the Secret Service, I really think will resonate for so many people in this country where, imagery is everything, brand and marketing.
Indeed. And I mean, obviously, I think that, we all saw that image. I suppose, again, from your vantage point, and it sounds like you were, I mean, from the media riser.
And can I just shout out, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've just got to shout out props to the Associated Press photographer who took it. I think those images can take on a life of their own. And that was a brilliant Wire colleague, and what an image. All credit to him.
I absolutely agree. And there's no question, it is a extraordinary image. I suppose the thing is, I mean, some people compared it to the image of U.S. service members mounting a flag on, the top of Iwo Jima on Mount Suribachi, right, during World War II. And I suppose the backstory of that photo in Iwo Jima is that, of course, there was a certain amount of artifice in that it was, of course, it was manufactured and it was used. And again, I don't want to either take credit away or give credit to former President Trump, but many other people have commented today about his instincts of understanding as opposed to actually doing the thing that he would have been given advice on and trained, if they trained to handle an incident such as this, he would have been advised to get the heck off the stage as quickly as possible and to follow the lead of the Secret Service. He didn't do that in this case, which is what produced the image, that we're both talking about. So again, I don't know if you, from where you were sitting or where you're standing, if you had any perspective about how that came about. But again, I think you have to give credit where it's due in the sense that he understood the power of that potential image. But in terms of a decision to decide to do that, as opposed to doing something else to, seek more a safer place at the time, any perspectives on how that went down?
I was stunned, but not because of the political moment or the political decision. I really wouldn't want to pass any judgment on that.
Of course.
That's for the voters.
Of course.
But what I will say is I was really surprised by the reactions of the Secret Service. And I always recall reading in a memoir that former Vice President Dick Cheney was physically manhandled out of his office and taken to a secure bunker on 9/11. And I always remembered that and thinking, wouldn't it have been faster to brief him and him move under his own steam? But no, he was lifted off his feet by an agent. And I was stunned that didn't happen in this case, that he was given the time to react, to embrace the crowd, to do anything other than be removed against his will. And I think already part of the debate, at least, has pivoted to the performance of the security services, all of them, because there has to be accountability. And I think that's got to be first and foremost. Could a risk assessment have realistically been taken in that time?
Yeah. I mean, and I suppose it is absolutely a question that I suppose will be answered. I know that Richie Torres, one of the congressmen from New York, has called for hearings or ready in terms of actually getting Secret Service management to come to the Hill to explain the findings of any initial investigation about exactly what happened and how. I guess the one question that's come up in, social media chatter over the course of the day is asking, I mean, one of the things about the shooter is the shooter apparently was, from an elevated position on a roof of a different building outside the security perimeter. And according to eyewitnesses, that the suggestion was that he was perhaps concealed from the kind of counter sniper Secret Service team on other buildings that were a couple hundred meters away. But the question that I've heard asked like a lot was, were there no drones doing any kind of aerial surveillance at the time? So you were on the ground. I mean, was that something you noticed or noticed the lack of?
I didn't see any drones at all at this event. That's not to say they weren't there, but I covered a Trump rally in the Bronx in New York City, and they were drones. They were being flown by the New York Police Department,
Right.
and they were very visible, and it was clear who was operating them and what they were looking at. There were certainly helicopters, which I believe had Pennsylvania State Police markings,
Mm.
but they were not overhead the whole time, and I don't recall the helicopter being overhead during this incident or in the run-up to it. But no,
Mm.
I didn't see drones. I think that's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose, yeah, that there are many, many questions that I think will some of which will be answered, some of which will be consumed into the conspiracy vortex, and never really achieve an answer that people will agree with, and then some of them we'll just never know. I suppose, and on that, obviously the suspected shooter, 20-year-old Thomas Crooks, he has a middle name, but like some reason American assassins always get, or attempted assassins always get three names for reasons that I've never really understood. So we'll just call him Thomas Crooks. I mean, the New York Times has been on this, like they deployed like a squad of people instantly, to cover the neighborhood where this guy grew up. And I mean, I'm looking at the New York Times page right now, and they've got like, the page about the suspect. There's exactly like 400 words of text, and no one knows anything about this guy. Anything that you've heard so far about, like, again, the suspect? I don't know if you want to say this, but like where you're on your way to, but like I know you were looking into it at the moment.
Yeah, we're following a couple of leads from people who've identified themselves as being acquaintances, but having covered high-profile cases like this, they can attract fantasists and liars and charlatans. People will seek to mislead for gain, for the yucks. It's very unfortunate that these tragic events can bring out the worst in people. So we're trying to run down leads, but you're absolutely right. There's not much yet known, and I think this country's best reporters are on it. And as a foreign wire, we're always going to be more or less in their footsteps on a story like this. But certainly, we're looking to determine his political leanings. Was he an extremist? According to some reporting that CNN had today, that he had been a registered Republican, but then was also recorded making a small donation to the Democratic Party. So really shedding no light on his outlook. And also, for such a young man, maybe it is possible that there wasn't a significant online footprint. If he wasn't chronically online, if he had not had a long employment history, maybe this is to be expected. I think it was through voter registration records that I found the address that I'm heading to now, and much of the other media did too. But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's certainly more questions than answers about this shooter. I agree.
But goodness, it's a live story, and we'll kind of continue to follow your updates about how things go. But if I could ask you to zoom out a little bit, Greg, obviously that you're coming at this, your colleagues from American news organizations are looking at this with a much more narrow lens, in the sense that their audience is following the play-by-play. They're following the ups and downs of this campaign, the horse race, the particulars of this, this is obviously an historic event of, we will see the significance of it, but in the sense that have both the resources and the mandate to be into the weeds on this stuff, whereas you, as a representative of a foreign news organization, are reporting to an audience that are looking at this from a rather different perspective of the stakes of what it means for the rest of the world. And what do you think that these events are going to mean for your audience? Are the larger issues just going to be completely lost in the last 4 months of this campaign as a result of these events?
I fear so. I really do. These rallies are insightful because Trump does go off script, and at the last two that I've been to, he has talked about the race for EVs, and he is totally down on the idea of fully electric cars. But then he pulls it back and he says he sees space for hybrids, beautiful hybrids made in America. And that's so interesting because base listens, and that will affect sales, no matter how marginally, and that will affect decisions made in boardrooms in this country and maybe beyond. This rally had been attended by 3 or 4 oil and gas figures, pro-oil and gas, seeking to put Pennsylvania oil and gas back on the map, in their words. And again, regrettably, that was all lost. The enthusiasm for Drill Baby Drill, as one of the speakers, the representative of a oil and gas workers association, that won't be reported. That was forgotten. That was in the 800 words that hit the cutting room floor. And that's regrettable. Even Trump's policy positions on immigration, on water security, which he occasionally touches on, are totally obscured by seismic events like this. And it's quite right that we should report them and concentrate on them and,
of course,
and afford resources to them. But with this race getting closer and November, roaring up on us, I do worry that any policy nuance, to the extent that we had it, is going to be lost. Absolutely.
Well, look, I know you're on your way to try to do some more reporting, and so please do stay safe and keep the priorities in front of you. But the main thing I would also ask is also you come back and update us as things go on. Are you planning to go to Milwaukee for the convention? What's next for you after this reporting, if you're trying to find out more about what happened with the suspect's background?
It's all up in the air. This really has been the curveball of the campaign so far. I wasn't due to go to Milwaukee, but I was due to attend the Democratic National Convention because of the questions around President Joe Biden's cognitive ability and his ability to see out a second term. And so we're very much throwing everything at that. But now with this, I think Milwaukee could cards too.
There was a press conference basically with the president was actually going to a room in the White House to be able to make a statement about the events, I think, as we were speaking. So I've not seen what President Biden said about this, but I do think it's, we will have to see. I mean, again, you've been there on the ground. You've been talking to folks. I guess last question. Again, I could ask you lots of stuff that's, more obviously related to climate and climate tech, but that seems superfluous and a bit silly at this point. My question is, about terms of the Democrats that you've spoken to, both, officials and rank and file, views about, I suppose, even before this event, where they thought things were headed.
The officials I've spoken to have really been rallying around the president. I've seen a concerted ability to draw close around him. I actually had a campaign official in West Pennsylvania reach out to me after a reporting trip to Scranton. Scranton being Joe Biden's birthplace and a town that really speaks to his hard scrabble upbringing narrative, something that he's talked about so much and made such a consequential part of his political identity. And we spoke to maybe 24 people in the city. And I think all but one of the people we spoke to, and she happened to be a neighbor of the house that he was born in, was just an ardent Biden devotee. Everyone else we spoke to felt that he should either graciously step aside or that Trump should win. There was very little support, and this precipitated contact from the campaign, which doesn't usually happen on stories like this. This was a pretty light vox pop piece, but the campaign official really wanted to get into it and understand the methodology and to put forward their own people, to speak to the president's mental abilities. And I feel like this is happening across the country. There is a increasingly concerted effort to close ranks around President Joe Biden. I'm not sure what's going to come of that, but it's very noticeable indeed.
Well, I mean, I suppose I'm not going to ask you to rank punditry and speculate about exactly what's going to happen, Greg, because that's not your job in the role that you're in. Perhaps over a beer sometime or a virtual wine, we can do that. But seriously, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us and to update us. And I suppose we'd love to get you back be able to get as things develop, and also maybe get your perspective as we zoom out to understand, the impact of the campaign as we go forward on the both climate policy and the broader climate tech industry, about how that might be affected by some of the decisions that the U.S. is about to make for one way or the other.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts that I'm more than happy to talk them through to the extent that I can be helpful anytime.
Well, Greg Walton, reporting from a car on his way to the suburbs of Pittsburgh. Thank you for joining us on Wicked Problems.
Thanks for having me.
Thank Greg and the AFP for lending him to us for the hour there. We will be speaking to him again as the rest of this campaign unfolds. Before we go, I just wanted to leave you with the video that Greg himself shot. You might see how quickly the crowd moved from jubilation to turning on people that they've immediately decided were somehow responsible for the shooting, and that would be the media covering it. So if you thought this was going to be the beginning of a new era of civility in American politics, leading to a reasonable policy discussion, don't hold your breath.